In this session, we're going to talk about writing subjective items. As you know, in our last session, we talked about writing objective items, those being the types of questions that are more aligned to multiple choice and true-false because there's a level of objectivity. It's rather known what the correct answer is. There is no subjective judgment. There's no opinion or feeling about what is correct or incorrect. And so that's as we talk about subjective items, that's really what we're getting at. It's based on someone's opinion or feelings rather than on facts or evidence. So as you can imagine, essay questions really fall into this category. We realize that there's a level of subjective judgment used to actually grade these types of items. And so, as I was indicating, essay questions fall into this category. And for me, at least, that's the type of question that I think of most frequently when I begin to think about subjective test questions. But as you see here as well, fill in the blank and short answer questions can potentially also fall into this category, depending on how they're worded. It also kind of depends on what author you read, on how they've classified these types of questions. But let's begin by talking a little bit about fill in the blank items. We realize that a given blank should be a central term in that related question. It's the meat of the question. We want to have some substance there to what we're assessing our students about. There's a little overlap here in some things we're talking about in the objective category, but I think that it's meaningful nonetheless for us to examine. The other idea here is we don't want to leave more than one item blank in a fill in the blank question. So in this example here, we would not say blank sailed a ship the Half Moon blank, or for blank to blank. Too many blanks to understand what we're even trying to assess as a part of this question. So limit it to one central key term or one related blank in that fill in the blank question. As we turn our attention to short answer items, we realize that these are the types of questions that require either a word or a short phrase, a number, a symbol, something that is going to elicit some type of brief response on the part of the students. As we write these questions, we need to make sure that we are very detailed and specific in the way in which we address these types of questions. So look at our examples here. We say, an animal that eats the flesh of other animals is blank. Now, in our mind, as we write the question, we may be clear about the fact that we're looking for carnivorous. But as we also realize that if we do not specify that we're looking for a classification of animals, students could answer something much more detailed or specific, something like a lion or a bear. It's really not what we're aiming for in that question, but technically it would be a correct answer. So we need to make sure that we are clear in the way in which we word those related questions. Here's another related point. It says, do not take statements directly from textbooks to use as a basis for short answer items. So for example, to say chlorine is a blank, they're again too broad. Even though it may work as a meaningful sentence in the textbook, it doesn't translate well to the exam. So a better way to word that would be, as we see here in this example on the bottom of the page, chlorine belongs to a group of elements that combine with metals to form salts. Therefore, chlorine is considered to be a/an halogen. And so we get that we're looking for that specific answer there. Notice as well we have avoided giving a grammatical clue or cue to this answer by putting a/an as indicated in that better example. Additionally, a direct question is often more desirable than an incomplete statement. So here, let's take a look at these examples. The poor example is this. John Glenn made his first orbital flight around the Earth in blank. Now, we may be looking for the year 1962, but students could be answering with something like in a spaceship or in a given month. And so we need to really be clear in the way in which we word that related question. So a better example is this. When did Glenn make his first orbital flight around the Earth? Now there again, they could plug in a month or a season as opposed to a year. So we're better off to use this best example that says, in what year did John Glenn make his first orbital flight around the Earth? There specifically, we're looking for a year, and we specify that in the given question. If an answer is to be expressed in related units, numerical units, make sure that you indicate what you want in your answer. This will obviously save you a great deal of time in the way in which you phrase and word that related question, and the way in which you have to grade that related question. So we have here pounds and ounces. If we're looking for pounds and ounces, make sure that you specify that accordingly. An essay item, as we move into this section here, an essay item is one for which the student supplies rather than selects the correct answer. I know we're all familiar with essay items, but there's some related advice that I would give to you as you develop your own related questions, and so we want to make sure that we do that at this time. A question that desires an extensive response that the student must supply. You do realize that essay questions often are about synthesizing related information or applying it in a new way to elicit a related demonstration of understanding of that related content. Often, essay questions must be graded by someone who is knowledgeable of that content, the content of that essay, and so it does limit who can actually provide the grading for these, which often is deemed as a limitation for related essay questions. As we look at the characteristics of what makes for a good question, let's consider these ideas. A good question requires students to process information at a much higher level, and the good questions don't simply ask students to recall information. So it's not just about them merely regurgitating what they have learned and repeating that back to you, but really it should be about their ability to apply that. They're again getting back to Bloom's taxonomy and processing that information at a higher level, so that when they are sharing their response, they're having to combine different elements or different objectives that they have learned or met throughout the given course. Good questions also clarify how the student should respond. So you need to tell your students the amount of time, the amount of page, the amount of wording, for example, the page limit, the related expectations that you want your students to be able to meet as a part of that course. The students should know what the teacher is looking for in the answer. There again, it goes back to the grand rule of measurement and evaluation. We're not out there to trick students. That is not our goal, and we should not be aiming to do that as a part of the courses that we teach and the way in which we assess our students. So let's think here a little bit about the benefits of related essay questions. What do you think are some of those benefits? As you can imagine, there are great advantages to writing essay questions because they are useful for assessing more complex learning outcomes. Think about that. You can actually address more information and perhaps synthesize and help students synthesize everything they have learned as a part of a given course, as opposed to just trying to perhaps pick and choose key ideas throughout the related course that perhaps would be better assessed through more objective type test questions. The other benefit is that these types of questions, these essay questions, tend to be a little bit easier to develop. And they can, it says eliminate there, but perhaps they could also reduce the level of guessing that is associated there. What I mean by that is that students don't have an answer before them that they can just bubble in and choose. They have to write something if they want to be able to get some credit for this given assignment. And so let's also think then about the disadvantages of essay questions. As we consider the disadvantages, we see that grading itself can be a lot more time-consuming and a lot more tedious work on the part of the teacher. As we indicated before, it needs to be done by someone who is knowledgeable of that given topic. We also realize that students can bluff. They're sitting there with a blank page in front of them, and that many students, in order to get some credit, will begin to write something there. So for the most part, students do end up getting some credit, and research says that teachers tend to grade longer essays with a greater amount of points. And so there perhaps is some benefit on students writing something than opposed to nothing. But we do also need to be careful that students are not just bluffing their way through a related answer. And so that's what I'm indicating there as well, that the essays that are longer tend to be graded higher. We also need to be aware that as a disadvantage of essay items, the amount of content that can be addressed is rather limited. Perhaps we could cover a wider array of content by kind of picking and choosing with objective test questions. But if we want students to synthesize that at a deeper level, perhaps the essay question is more appropriate. Let's additionally think about some of the level of processing that students have to go through as they provide an answer to related essay questions. Think about this example here. Here's a poor example. Describe the escape route that Mark and Alicia took in the story Haunted Mansion. not necessarily anything wrong with this question. It's just not as strong as it potentially could be. It's merely just asking students to recall related information as opposed to being able to apply it. So if we look at the second example, it's asked students to compare the advantages of the two different escape plans by the two main characters in that related story, and then ask them to consider why would they have chosen one of those given plans as well. And so that why question asks for that deeper level of application, obviously. Here's another example. What were the forces that led to the outbreak of the Civil War? I'm sure that many of us have seen a similar question on history exams in the past. A better way to word that question would be to do what we see at the bottom of the page here. Compare and contrast the positions of the North and the South at the outbreak of the war. But it also asks students to qualify their answer by discussing these very specific aspects of those differences between the two sides. And so the economic conditions, foreign policies, political sentiments, social conditions. And obviously, depending on the grade level, you may just want to choose one of those areas. But the benefit of this is that you know specifically what you're looking for in the answer, and the student also knows what you are looking for in the answer. Otherwise, students may be answering in relation to the economic conditions when really you're wanting to know about the social conditions. And so you need to make sure that you are specifying that clearly for your students. As you begin writing essay questions and continue in that process, I'm sure you all have been down this road before. But as you do this, compare, contrast, give reasons for, predict what would happen if. All of these are leading stems that are relevant, obviously, for writing related questions. Additionally, we want to make sure that we are not asking our students or telling them to take a specific position on hot topics, on political topics, for example. And so a better way to do that, as we see in the related examples here, would be to ask students to compare and contrast the differences between two different related perspectives. Additionally, there's relevance in making sure you're clear in how much time and the amount of space that students will have in writing their related answer. It allows them to know how deep they should be writing their related response as well. It does help them budget their time as well as to indicate that related detail. Hopefully this information has been helpful to you in the process of writing essay questions as well as developing subjective test questions.